Goes to work quickly. Down to 6 seconds. Carr going down again. And it's Quentin Williams this time for the Jets.
Over the middle in the air. Picked off. Brian Poole to the end zone. Touchdown. Hunter the beat, and the punter brings him down. Braden Mann saved a touchdown most likely.
Looks right. Fires a bomb down the right sideline again for Mims. What a catch by Denzel Mims.
And welcome back to an episode of the Cool Your Jets podcast. Your hosts, Ben Blessington and Michael Nania. Michael, another week, another Jets loss. 3 more games to go until they get Trevor Lawrence. How you feeling, man?
Yeah, I mean, this game is, the reaction to this one is a lot different to the finale of the last
Yeah, we don't have your squealing reaction to a Henry Ruggs touchdown this week. It was a little less dramatic.
Yeah, this one was not as much drama. No, close as much drama. No, I mean, this was just as lopsided of a Jets loss as I've ever seen. And the crazy, I told you about this before we started, but the craziest thing about this team is you always see these great opening drives. This is now 7 games in a row they've scored on the opening drive, which I believe is the second longest active streak in the league. And you just know, no matter how good they look on that first drive, it's not going to be sustained. It's just absolutely wild how they could start off so strongly, so consistently, but then that has absolutely no indication of how they're going to play the rest of the game. So this was a complete blowout.
And it's weird, especially with Sam Darnold. I mean, with Adam Gase, we've kind of known the story for him is he just can't adjust. It's been the story for him since his time in Miami. But it's weird for Sam Darnold too, because I mean, he's just so much worse this season. I mean, and we were talking about it during the game, and it's not just like a few things aren't breaking his way, or maybe it's the shoulder injury. I mean, he's just not seeing the field well at all. He's missing easy throws. And a lot of the things that he was really good at in USC or really good in his rookie, or even his last year, his sophomore season, they're not translating to this year. And when you talk about that opening drive, I mean, he is at his best at the beginning of the game because everything is scripted. He's practiced it all week. He knows his reads. But then as the game goes on and things are more organic and he has to make plays under pressure and things are less scripted, that's where he falls apart. And it's just such a difference to the player that Sam Darnold was his first 2 years in the season, or first 2 years of his career, or back at USC when things broke down. That was when Sam Darnold was at his best. And when things have broken down this year, Sam Darnold has been at his absolute worst. That's where we see a lot of the bonehead interceptions. He should have had 3 or 4 today. He was lucky he didn't have any of those. Michael, when you look at Sam Darnold this season, but specifically this game, I mean, what has happened to him? Is there any explanation? And how much is he hurting his draft stock with the way that he's playing?
Yeah, I mean, it's just really hard to figure out. It's just a fascinating topic, and I think about it a lot because, not only has he, not taken the leap that we hoped he would, but he's just not the player he was the last 2 seasons. And, he had a lot of improvements to make to fulfill his potential, out of his rookie season, out of last season, but he's not even close to where he was as a rookie or last season. He is just basic things that even for him were simple. He's just not executing anymore. He's locking onto his first read consistently, taking sacks he shouldn't take, not recognizing, like the first dropped interception straight into Jamal Adams' chest. I mean, the Seahawks do that a lot. It's a common coverage in the NFL.
By the way, that couldn't have been any more. I wanted a Becton pancake of Adams, or when I thought Mims was going to play, I wanted a Mims Moss. But I love that Marcus May made some amazing one-handed tip drill interception, and then Jamal Adams just has stones for hands and couldn't drop the easiest pick six that Sam Darnold has given any defensive back. But continue. I just wanted to make that point. I know you're not a Jamal Adams hater like myself, but I think most Jets fans can agree that was probably the highlight of the entire game.
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely all the confirmation we need that his hands just are not really, he doesn't have the hands to make those plays. But
I think you could have caught that, Michael.
I definitely could have. Would I in an NFL situation with all the pressure on? Maybe not. But I mean, I definitely am capable of making that catch.
It's just amazing that you're right. It's probably just a pressure thing, and his eyes are probably to the end zone, and he's so focused on making a tackle, whatever. But it's almost like a basketball player missing free throws. As a defensive back, you can't have that many dropped interceptions. I mean, it's ridiculous at this point that he hasn't just hit the jugs machine every single day, the entire offseason, instead of tweeting about how much God cares about his football game, his inspirational quotes. I mean, he's literally just a motivational speaker that blitzes. But
Yeah, and with Darnold, just on that interception with Adams, I mean, like it's just a common thing. The Seahawks do that a lot. He does that a lot. Jamal Adams in that, especially in that defense, the way the Seahawks are using him, is not a deep cover safety, and he consistently does that. Drops into the hole, into the shallow part of the field, and still just not recognizing it, throwing it straight to him. I mean, these are rookie mistakes, and not only are they rookie mistakes, even he as a rookie didn't make these mistakes as often as he's making them this season. He's just completely fallen off a cliff, and it's really odd to watch because he showed so much to love over those first 2 seasons. And again, even though he still had to improve quite a bit, he looked like a legitimate prospect who did have the potential to be really good if he cleaned up a few things, not just after his rookie season, but after last season as well. I definitely believed in him quite a bit, but something happened from last season to this year. I don't know what it is, whether it's an injury, whether it's, his own something that he changed mechanically that just hasn't worked out. I don't know what it was, but he's not even close to where he was the past 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to put, your finger on exactly what it is. Only Sam Darnold really knows what it is. But from an outsider's perspective, we can pretty much clearly say it's a confidence issue at this point. There may be other factors, but his confidence is clearly shot. Adam Gase is clearly not the right head coach for him. We said that in our Adam Gase podcast. And look, me and you, more so me, have the tendency to be optimistic about the team and let maybe some of the fan side of the podcast take over for the analyst side. But we did mention that Adam Gase podcast, how he is not the right head coach or the right offensive coordinator, I guess I should say, for Sam Darnold. That a lot of Adam Gase's offense really is built towards a pocket passer. And that's just not who Sam Darnold is as a player. And so I think it was just a wrong scheme, a bad team, and his confidence is just completely shot. And I think he's a player that is, and we've seen it throughout his time in college, but more so his first 2 years in the league, where he would catch fire for games at a time, where he's just a streaky kind of player where if he puts together a few good throws, he can put together a few good drives. And he had games, specifically the last 4 of his rookie season, the Giants game all the way through the Oakland game last season, where he started to play like a real elite NFL quarterback. But then he has the opposite, where he has slumps, and he's just had a long slump this entire season. It's just snowballing. It's just getting worse and worse, and he's second guessing himself, and he's not pulling the trigger. And I'm sure as soon as we see the coaches film, we're going to see even more mistakes and missed touchdowns and missed passes. This was the league's worst pass defense, and they couldn't do anything. I mean, they didn't even look like they belonged in the same field. I wasn't expecting the Jets to win. Hell, last week I said that they were going to get blown out, which is what happened. But I expected at least one passing touchdown from Sam Darnold, and he just doesn't even look like remotely the same player. Do you think he's fixable? Do you think that the scenario that we have all been saying for the majority of the season is, he's going to get traded to San Francisco and learn under Kyle Shanahan, or he's going to get traded to Chicago or Pittsburgh or Indianapolis, and he's going to go there and he's going to end up being a solid NFL quarterback. And Jets fans are going to be happy for him because we'll end up with Trevor Lawrence. Do you even think that's possible for Sam Darnold? Because as I said in the initial question, how much does it hurt his draft stock? And I meant in a trade package, because at the beginning of the year, when this whole taking Trevor Lawrence talk started, it was, well, you can trade Sam Darnold for a 1, and then it dropped to a 2 and change. And now it kind of feels like it's the 3. And if he keeps stinking it up the last 3 games of the year, it might drop to a 4. What is the package that you think the Jets could get for him at this point? How much has that stock fallen in your eyes? And is he even fixable? Is it even worth for a team like Chicago to trade for him when they already have Trubisky? Is he even at this point that much better of a prospect than Mitch Trubisky?
Well, I do think you can't look at it, too extreme in either way. There's not 0 chance he's fixable, and it's not a guarantee he's going to be great if he goes to, a good situation like San Francisco, Chicago, Indy, wherever he goes. It's not a guarantee, but there's also not 0 chance. But as he does stack up these games, because we're at the point now where he's played 9 games this season and he hasn't had one legitimately strong game. And the opportunities have been there. We've seen them. And that's the biggest thing. It's not for me, not necessarily the turnovers. It's not even really the accuracy. It's just there are open guys he doesn't get the ball to. He'll even look at them and not pull the trigger numerous times this season. The Crowder potential touchdown against Buffalo. There's another Crowder potential touchdown against Denver. The Mims touchdown against Buffalo in the second game. Actually, the Crowder touchdown I'm talking about was against Miami, the most recent game. But there have just been so many examples of
the Jamal Adams quote unquote sack that he had, where Sam Darnold just ran out of bounds. Chris Herndon was wide open, And you could see him pump faking and thinking about it, but he's just so paralyzed by the fear of making a mistake that he doesn't throw that, which is rookie Sam Darnold throws that.
Right. And these are things where, like, a fresh start is going to benefit him quite a bit. He'll have a new offense, new teammates, just new city, and his confidence does have a chance to restore itself. But at the same time, these are just such bad mistakes that, confidence aside, you just got to be able to make these throws if you're a starting NFL quarterback. And, last 2 seasons, he was, for the most part. He, again, had a long way to go to fulfill his potential, but he wasn't making mistakes this badly, this frequently. So I do think there's a chance. There's definitely a non-zero chance he could become a solid starter. Maybe not a superstar, but someone's maybe stopgap quarterback a couple years. Maybe they're Kirk Cousins sort of starting quarterback level. But at the same time, there's definitely a chance that he doesn't really become an answer for anyone, because the level he's playing right now is, he's been the worst qualified starting quarterback in the league in terms of, most metrics. But then when you look at his film, you see the exact same thing that the numbers tell you. So could he figure it out somewhere else? Definitely. I definitely think there is a chance he could do that. But how high is that chance? I think it's definitely only going down week after week as he, continues to fail to show you even close to anything he showed you the past couple seasons. So it will be interesting to see what he does. But in terms of the trade value, you're right. I think it's definitely decreasing, but I do think there is a certain floor as a 23-year-old guy who was the 3rd overall pick, just a couple seasons ago, has the built-in excuse of Adam Gase. Ryan Tannehill, I think, helps him out quite a bit with what he's done post-Gase. Not that they're comparable, because Tannehill is obviously much older than Darnold, and he was never this bad in terms of production. So it's really apples and oranges, but at the same time, I still think it helps in terms of the Gase excuse for Darnold, what Tannehill's been able to do. So teams will buy into that. So I do think there's a floor. No matter how bad he plays, he still has things as a part of his pedigree that you can buy into, especially the age, with him only being 23. So I think that I don't know if I see him going lower than a 3rd round pick. I really don't, just because of how much upside that I think some teams will see in him. But at the same time, he's definitely, he's definitely pushing it as low as it could go. It's just, the question is, how low is that floor? To me, I think it's a 3rd, but is he pushing it down to maybe a 4th? If he keeps playing this way, maybe, but I still think 3rd is probably where I estimate his value is right now.
If Michael Nania is a GM of one of these teams, let's say San Francisco, do you think that's a gamble worth taking? Are you personally taking that gamble? Do you think that obviously you said it could go either way, whether or not Darnold could end up developing, but in your eyes, do you think that it's a gamble worth taking? Let's say for a 3rd round pick.
Yeah, I think I would for a 3rd round pick. If I'm a team where I feel like I think what's really important, I think he has to have time before he starts again. Let him be a backup for a year, at least start the year as a backup, and then maybe get tossed in the middle of the season when it's time for him. I don't think it would be best for him to be someone's starter going into next season. I think it would really benefit him to kind of take some time off on the sidelines for a little bit, because this is something he's never done in his career. He came right in and was a starting quarterback in his first week, and that's been his role his entire career. I think it would help him a little bit to be a backup for a little bit, just to regroup, kind of see the game from a different perspective. Obviously, he's been out for games and watched from the sideline,
right?
But I do think it would help for him to be a backup for a little bit. But if I'm a team like San Francisco and I have an offense where, there's a really good supporting cast, it helps the quarterback as much as it possibly can, I would feel good about giving up a 3rd round pick to take a chance on him as 3rd. I think that is definitely worth it. But higher than a 3rd, I would not feel comfortable with that right now.
Do you think, or I guess I should say, who do you think is the best team for Sam Darnold from Sam's perspective? Where is the best situation for him that he could conceivably land? Do you think it's Pittsburgh? You mentioned him sitting behind for a year. Maybe he sits behind Ben for the beginning of the season, maybe the entire season. Or do you think it's a place like San Francisco, like you said, where he may have to play a little bit earlier, but he would at least have a stellar supporting cast and be learning under Kyle Shanahan?
Yeah, I do keep going San Francisco. And I know I said that it would benefit him to be backup at first. If he does go to San Fran, they would probably be getting rid of Jimmy G. So I do like San Francisco. I think he would be a good fit there. I think that the Niners do a good job of getting the receivers open over the middle, and that Darnold would really have an opportunity to just let his arm talent shine and not have to think too much, because that's kind of what Garoppolo does there. The Niners do such a good job of getting people open, establishing the run game and the play action, and Garoppolo can just make throws and he makes the right decisions. He doesn't have to think too much. I think offenses like that are really, like, for example, you talked about in your article with Arthur Smith and the Titans. That's where you can get the best out of them. And obviously that doesn't mean the Jets would be right to stick with him and try to fit him in that offense just because of what he's shown this season. You have the opportunity to restart. But for Darnold, I think an offense like that runs a lot of play action, gets quarterback outside on bootlegs, whatever offense takes the most off the quarterback's plate in terms of thinking and puts it more on their physical ability is the best fit for him. So I think some of those teams like Pittsburgh would work in terms of a place where he can go and sit for a while and learn behind a veteran and then compete once that guy leaves. That would work. But I mean, there are definitely a multitude of places that probably fit those descriptions, but it'll be interesting to see what he does.
And if you're talking about him sitting for a year, I think that opens up, because I think a lot of people are thinking of him as a guy that you trade for and he starts, and that's where Indianapolis comes into the equation. Actually, that's a place you could sit behind Phillip for another year. But a team that I haven't heard talked about that did just pop into my head when you talked about him sitting for a year, Tampa Bay, sitting behind Tom Brady maybe for a season and then taking over. I think that could be a situation. And when we talk about his trade value, and obviously a lot of Jets fans and this myself included feel like it's getting to the point where can they even get a 3rd round pick for him? But then when you think about there's all these teams that either need a starting quarterback or have an older aging starting quarterback and would be willing to sacrifice a 3rd round pick just to take a shot on a guy who's at one point seen as the best quarterback in the draft. And he's only a year away removed from a promising season in 2019. A lot to consider with Sam Darnold. And you're not worried about, and I guess this kind of continues our conversation about getting Trevor Lawrence. And I've come back to, I feel pretty confident about the Rams game next week. I don't think the Jets win that. The Browns game, a little less confident, but I still think they're a much better team than the Jets. And barring they completely crap the bed, I think the Jets will also lose that. The game that worries everybody is that Week 17 Patriots game. And granted, it could be the number one pick could be locked up by then, especially if the Jags find a way to beat the Chicago Bears Week 16. But that Week 17 game, especially if New England is already out of it, which it looks like they might be at this point, if Bill Belichick knows that if he wins this game, he could be staring at Trevor Lawrence for the rest of his coaching career in New England, especially if Trevor is as good as people think. Are you worried about that Week 17 game at all, or are you so confident in Darnold being this bad at this point that you're very confident that the Jets, if he continues to start and he stays healthy, will lose the next 3 games?
Well, I think I would be lying if I said I wasn't worried about it at all. But I do think, first of all, these next 2 games, especially the Rams game, it seems, and you never want to guarantee anything. This is the NFL. Anything can happen. But
I love how it's the reverse of like a good team guaranteeing a win over a bad team. And this is just a bad team guaranteeing a loss over a good team.
Exactly. Like, take it one day at a time, 1 week at a time, guys. Just lose 1 game at a time. That's the approach. But the next 2 games, you're talking about 2 9-win teams. It doesn't seem like the Jets would have a good chance in either of those. We'll see. But the Patriots game, I think just because of the dynamic of if Belichick has a chance to keep Trevor Lawrence out of his division, I could definitely see him doing the best he can in terms of his roster decisions.
Yeah, starting Jarrett Stidham.
Right, starting Stidham. And that is, of course, if they're out of the playoff picture, which it seems likely, not impossible. If they win their next 2 games, they'll be in it. That he would do something like that. That he's the number one guy who you would expect to make that kind of move. But at the same time, with the way the Jets have played with Darnold this season, it just, especially how he has played against the Patriots in his career, 3 points in 2 games. And that was over his first 2 seasons where he was a much better quarterback than he is this year. Even if the Patriots try to lose, I'm not sure if Darnold can go in there and win that game. But it's definitely something worth worrying about. But I keep eyeing Jacksonville. I was watching that game intensely today against the Titans. Well, for the half game when it actually was competitive. But Gardner Minshew is back, or at least it looks like he is, and they'll potentially start him for the next game. I think that is big. They have the Ravens this week, who are not the Ravens of the past. They have the Bears the week after that, who have seemed like the most winnable game for Jacksonville for a while. But
Except the Bears just blew out Houston.
Have a great game against the Texans today, so they definitely showed a lot there. But I think Minshew back is a big boost. But I mean, it's just so stressful for the Jets to be 0-13 and be in this tight race, still have to be in a tight race for the number 1 pick. It's definitely wild.
Yeah, it's just that week 17 game is very nerve-wracking for me. And I think it's just the Jets have broken me too many times. It's the reverse of 2015, how I think that is the game that is sticking with me in the sense that we'd won that week 16 against New England, and it felt like, oh boy, we're going to the playoffs. All we have to do is just beat this crappy Bills team, and we got it. It's kind of the reverse this year. It's like, oh, we just got to lose to the Patriots, and we got it. I mean, how many times have the Patriots beaten the Jets in my, 13 years or whatever it's been of being a Jets fan? It's hard to count.
We're as afraid of the Pats as we usually are, just for the exact opposite.
It's literally the exact opposite reasons. And like you said, I don't think that Bill Belichick is going to try to lose the game, but I'm sure that there's that discussion. Like the week of that game, and the Patriots are already out of it. And keep in mind, the Patriots have not been out of it like that. When was the last time the Patriots had a meaningless Week 17 game outside of the fact of a meaningless Week 17 game because they had already clinched a playoff spot or something? When was the last time the Patriots were just eliminated from the playoffs? And I think that's just going to be a deflating team, a team that underperformed, a team that's ready for the season to be over. And Bill Belichick, that whole week, in his conversations with the coaches, you don't think somebody mentions like, hey, Bill, I mean, if we lose this game, I mean, we might screw the Jets out of Trevor Lawrence. And some people have made the argument, well, Bill wants to be the one to put the nail in the Jets 0-16 season. It's like, I don't really think Bill Belichick gives a shit about that. Like, yes, that may feel good, but what hurts the Jets more? Them going 0-16 and getting Trevor Lawrence, or them going 1-15 and costing themselves arguably the best QB prospect to ever come out in the NFL draft, a top flight head coaching candidate. Not saying they can't get a good head coaching candidate with Fields, but a top flight head coaching candidate. All the revenue that Trevor is going to bring in, when he talks about Bill hurting the Jets ownership, all the revenue that Trevor's going to bring in between jersey sales and ticket sales, the fact that this franchise will get a complete facelift if they get Trevor. So Bill Belichick knows that if he loses this game, he's helping the Jets more than he's hurting them. And I agree. I don't think he's going to go out there to tank. I don't think anybody in the NFL tanks. I don't think players do. I don't think coaches do. But I think management and Bill Belichick, the GM, may look at 2021 and beyond and say, you know what, let's start Jarrett Stidham, or let's bench Sony Michel, or let's, just give the Jets a chance to win. And with how bad Darnold's been playing, this really isn't a threat. And I tweeted this out and I got laughed at for it. And that's fine. I hope I'm wrong. But the thought of an Adam Gase and Sam Darnold duo that has been absolutely terrible, but they have nothing to lose. And you can make the argument they've had nothing to lose the entire season. But that last game, they both know they're out of there. The rest of the team is fighting to not be 0-16. Nobody in that locker room wants 0-16 on their resume. They have a lot more to play for than New England does. And that game just freaks me out. But I agree. I mean, this game against Seattle was helpful because we just got to see how bad this team truly is. I felt like the last month or so, they've been trending upwards pretty consistently. And this was a nice shot back down. I mean, look, they hadn't won a single game. I
think you definitely saw the impact of Gregg Williams being fired.
Absolutely. And Frank Bush's defense, it certainly helped the tank to fire Gregg Williams. He certainly has his flaws.
And it's not even his fault. It's just that when you fire your defensive coordinator mid-season, you're just going to lose all the flavor and creativity. You're just going to go to your basic vanilla packages because that's all you can really do. So it's definitely a pro-tank move. And
Gregg Williams is bad, but he was probably the best coach in the Jets staff. I mean, I can't think of another coach that would rival that. I mean, maybe one of the position coaches like Denard Wilson or Sean Jefferson or something, but Gregg Williams is a solid coach in this league. I know he clearly makes some boneheaded decisions and he's over aggressive and people don't like his attitude. And I get that, but let's be honest. The reason the Jets won 7 games last year was because of Gregg Williams, and the Jets had a top run defense again this year because of Gregg Williams. And you look at the 1 week without him, they get gashed on the ground by Chris Carson the entire game. So I agree. I think firing Gregg Williams was a pro tank move, even though it obviously wasn't intended that way from Adam Gase. Generally in these game recaps, we talk about some players that played well, but I really can't think of anybody that really played that well. I guess Marcus May had a great or terrific interception, but Becton, I think, looked good, but a quiet game from him, which is a good thing for a rookie offensive lineman. Mims didn't play, so there's no fun plays to really talk about. The passing game didn't really get going. They split carries between Frank Gore, Josh Adams, and Ty Johnson. Clearly, Adams and Johnson are giving the Jets more juice in the running game, but thank God Adam Gase loves him, some Frank Gore. But outside of that, I mean, yeah, it was just another undisciplined performance. Bless Austin celebrating up 30 or down 30 points is ridiculous. Just it's a classic Jets football. And I don't mean to say anything. Braden Mann did not look that good either. So just a depressing performance. So Michael, let's just hop into a mailbag. We did ask for some mailbag questions.
Before we go into the mailbag,
okay, all right.
About that Patriots game a little bit, week 17. I think it will be, if they do get to, if that situation comes up where the number one pick is still in doubt in that game, do you think that Joe Douglas, that they should, and will they, should he and the organization step in and try to sort of up the tanking energy for that game, whether it's pulling out Sam Darnold, whether it just moves like that to try to maximize their chances
100%
of losing that game?
100%. And pulling out Sam Darnold in favor of Joe Flacco is actually against the tank, but I know you meant more so James Morgan. I 100% agree with that.
Not Flacco, because obviously that's anti-tank. I mean, going to James Morgan, right. I'm pulling out everything you can do.
The scary part about that game, and you've talked about, well, they had Flacco, now they're going to be downgrading to Darnold, and they'll be on the road, so it'll be different than their first game. But in that first game, the Jets didn't have Mekhi Becton, and they didn't have Quinnen Williams. And both, assuming they both stay healthy over the next two games, will be in that game. I agree with that. I mean, first of all, none of the coaches are going to be there. Hell, it will probably be run by a different owner. So it's like a lot of the stench from this season will be gone next season. I'm sure there will still be Mekhi Becton and some players left over, but there's going to be a lot of overhaul. And that's the benefit of going 0-16 outside of getting Trevor Lawrence, is it forces the Johnsons to really take a look at themselves, to really blow this whole thing up. Because last year, Michael and I were talking about it before the podcast. It was just annoying that the entire offseason we heard about our 6-2 finish and we won 7 games and that we're going to take that momentum and carry it into 2020. And not a single coach was fired. Not enough really happened in free agency for the Jets to overhaul the roster. I thought they had an amazing draft class, but when you look at it, the Jets really didn't change much from their 2019 team to their 2020 team. I thought they were marginally better in some ways, but worse in many other ways, considering that they lost Jamal Adams, CJ Mosley out again. They lost Robbie Anderson. But what is 0-16 team, what that does to ownership is that just enforces that they have to fully clean house. I mean, obviously Joe Douglas and his staff will be staying, but they're going to fire every single coach in this building, and they're going to drop a lot of different players. There's no sugarcoating an 0-16 season.
Right.
There's no way to make that look better than what it actually is. A giant goose egg over 16 weeks is inexcusable in the NFL. It's only happened 2 other times over a 16-game season. And I think that's a positive in my eyes. I think last year it was just annoying that we got to hear about this rave finish. And when you looked at that 6-2 finish, those last 8 games,
it's a fantastic point because the point you're making is great, because ownership does not evaluate in an in-depth way. They just look at the win total. The Jets going 7-9. They won 3 more games in 2018. That's great. They finished 6-2. They were 7-5 with Sam Darnold. When you just look at it that way, it seems great. But like I'm sure you were about to get into, the 6-2 finish, they beat Daniel Jones. They beat Dwayne Haskins. They beat a Raiders team that was not good. They beat a Bills team that was resting. They beat Mason Rudolph and Devlin Hodges. They beat nobody. So they didn't even play. Offensively, they weren't good, which is why Adam Gase was brought here. Gregg Williams carried them to that finish. They got blown out by the Ravens, blown out by the Bengals. All the games they won were close. Most of the games.
2 winless teams.
So 2 winless teams. So they lost to 2 winless teams. So they were, even though they won 7 games, they weren't nearly that good. They clearly needed much more change than they had. But just because that 7 wins is there, that 7-5 with Darnold, that's all the confirmation ownership needs, because they don't actually evaluate the football side of it. But like you said, going 0-16, you can't argue that changes are going to come. So from a fan perspective, having that 0 definitely. It makes you feel confident that it is going to prompt ownership to make the changes that have to be made in a way that a misleading 7-9 record just didn't do last season. So that's the biggest poison to an NFL franchise. When your team is misleadingly decent, like the Jets were last season, it's going to lead to your ownership investing in a team that isn't nearly as good as it needs to be. That's what happened last season, but now there's going to be no choice. So that's a great point by you. It definitely opens up. It makes it clear and obvious to ownership. You got to make changes.
Yeah, and the changes there will be. I think the other point is, and I kind of alluded to it, because people have talked about how the Jets have ruined Sam Darnold, and that's fair. I mean, they objectively have, but all the people who have been involved in ruining Sam Darnold, outside of maybe 5% Joe Douglas's fault, but there are reasons that it's his fault. They're all going to be gone. Hell, it'll be a different owner, from the sense that I think Woody Johnson's going to be coming back. He will be taking back that main title. I think Chris Johnson.
I think that's the quote. That's the quote of the year.
I mean, I agree with you. I think that was his State of the Union for all Jets fans. And after hearing Woody Johnson's inspirational tweet, I feel much better about the Jets organization. But it will be Woody Johnson, and Chris Johnson will still have somewhat of a role. But it'll be a new owner, a new GM, for Trevor Lawrence, because Sam Darnold's GM was Mike McCagney. Let's be honest. A new head coach, plenty of different players, and Woody obviously isn't a great owner. I don't think you need an amazing owner to win in this league. I think you just need somewhat a competent owner, in the sense that he just passes off his duties. And I think the Johnsons do fully trust Joe Douglas. And I certainly believe in Joe Douglas. So I think that this is a positive direction that the Jets are heading in, even though in some ways this is the worst it's ever been. I still feel very optimistic. But when you look at Woody Johnson, yes, I think he screwed over a ton of fans with the PSLs. I think MetLife Stadium is a giant tin can. I think they've made a number of bad personnel moves over the last decade, pairing Rex with Idzik and bringing in Tebow, and certainly caring more about ticket sales and revenue than the actual team success. But the first 10 years of Woody Johnson's tenure were arguably the best 10-year stretch in Jets history since the Super Bowl, I guess you could say. So the Jets can certainly win with Woody Johnson. I think management is much more important than ownership. And you could make the argument that coaching is even more important than management. And I think the Jets have competent enough owners, if they just stay out of the way, that they can win. It's when the Johnsons start meddling, that's where we have some issues. But I think that they trust Joe Douglas, that I think they will listen to him on this head coaching hire. I think they will listen to the 0-16 record and do what is necessary to turn this franchise around, because nobody wants to own an 0-16 team. And to go back to what you had asked a few minutes ago, yes, if I'm Joe Douglas, I'm putting in James Morgan, I'm pulling Mekhi Becton, I'm pulling Quinnen Williams, I'm pulling Denzel Mims. And there may be some players that complain about that and say, we were objectively tanking, but I'm going to say the vast majority of this roster is not going to be here next year. None of the coaches are, and if these players come back and they start winning games with Trevor Lawrence, nobody's going to complain. That's me as a fan. That's what I would say. Do I think Joe Douglas would do it? No, I don't. I think they will stick everybody in there. I don't think he's going to do that to Adam Gase.
Yeah, I agree. I would bet that they don't do anything different than what they've been doing, but I do think there is a slight possibility that something is done. It will be interesting to see if it gets to that point.
I would say there's about a 15% chance that they start James Morgan. I don't think they bench Darnold for Flacco or anything like that. They wouldn't be that dumb. But I think there's, maybe I could see them not having Flacco on the active roster, on the active game day roster, and having Morgan active, and maybe he's the backup, or just so you could put him in if Darnold's not playing well. I don't even know what that would accomplish. But I'm just saying, I think there's a slight chance that Morgan might play that Week 17 game. But outside of that, I don't really see them benching everybody unless Mekhi Becton, suffers another shoulder injury risk to come out Week 15 against the Rams. In that case, it's like put him on IR. Preemptively, I could see them making some moves like that. I think you will see over the next few weeks a lot of different guys going IR who maybe could play in that Week 17 game, but it's just like, don't risk it. We're 0-15. Don't worry about it. I could see that. But the week of the game, I don't think they're going to make any drastic decisions, but we'll see. So let's hop into this mailbag rapid fire. Aside from QB, sorry, by the way, this is from @NetsMetsJets Jets is one. I think that might be number one in the draft order is what is handles referring to. But aside from QB, what is the next must-have position? I'm assuming he's talking about for this Jets team. So besides from the need at QB, Mike, would you say that edge rusher is the Jets' most needy position? Is it receiver, corner, offensive line? What comes number two on Joe Douglas's needs to address this offseason?
That's a really good question because they do have so many needs. My first instinct when I sort of read and thought about the question was edge rusher, but then I sort of went back to the reason the Jets are in the position they are in right now anyway. and that's failing to build around their young quarterback. So I think it all starts with that quarterback and the offense. And the Jets are in a better spot now than, despite the record, in terms of quarterback support right now than they were when Darnold came in. They have Mims, they have Becton, even George Fant and McGovern, I think, are probably better than any other lineman they had when Darnold came in. They have Crowder. So I think they're in a better spot, but you got to do a lot better. You got to do as good as you possibly can. You can't cut any corners. You got to make sure, whether it's Lawrence, Fields, whoever it is, that you're giving them the best possible chance. So I think it starts on offense. And to me, I think the biggest position of weakness is probably guard. So I think that is, and I know probably interior offensive line doesn't seem like the number one position that you'd be thinking about for an 0-16 team, but for me it is. I definitely think that you have to make this supporting cast as good for your young quarterback as it could possibly be. And you know, that's emphasized because the Jets were so bad at doing it with Darnold, but it doesn't matter who you are, what you did before. It's just so important to support your young quarterback. And I think guard is probably the biggest position of weakness on that offensive line. Van Roten was decent. Alex Lewis was very bad. And the depth behind those two guys isn't good. Cameron Clark hasn't been able to get out there. I think it's guard for me personally, but you could make the case for edge rusher, wide receiver. I'd listen to that too. If you want to, you know, get a star weapon to make this offense as good as it can be. To me, it's guard, but there are a lot of positions you can make a case for on either side of the ball.
I agree. I think if you pair somebody next to Becton, that's a top tier NFL guard, I think you're going to see this offense continue to take off. And when you look at this team, I guess I should say, when you look at free agency for this team, Joe Thuney and Brandon Scherf are easy targets for that position. But I'd be fine with doubling up at interior offensive line. I'd be fine with, or I'd be ecstatic if they signed a guy like Joe Thuney, and then with that Seahawks pick, if a guy like Wyatt Davis is available, or even Trey Smith, taking him, and then you rebuilt that entire interior of the offensive line. Then you have Becton, Thuney, McGovern, and Wyatt Davis or Trey Smith or whatever, and George Fant for another year. That's a very good offensive line for Trevor Lawrence.
I mean, just hearing you lay that out, if you can get, if it's Lawrence, that'd be great. Hopefully that happens. But no matter who it is, if you get your young quarterback to come behind Mekhi Becton, one of those two guys mentioned, whether it's Davis, Trey Smith, even someone else, Connor McGovern, Joe Thuney, and George Fant, I mean, that is tremendous.
And it's been Joe Douglas's mission statement from the start that he's going to rebuild this offensive line. So there's more work to come there. And then if, let's say they can even get to that point, which I think that's a top 10 offensive line unit in the league. And when you have a top 10 offensive line unit, your offense is going to skyrocket. You're going to be able to run the football. You're going to be able to pass. You're going to be able to use play action. But then I think Douglas, the next year in 2022, sorry, I had to think about that for a second, 2022, he can go ahead and replace Fant and McGovern if either of them are not playing up to par, and then he can just continue to add to that unit. And that's just, as I said, it's been his mission statement from day one that he's going to rebuild the offensive line. And that's where you find a lot of successful NFL teams. As I've said, when he got hired, there's no good teams, or there's no bad teams with good offensive lines. There's some good teams with bad O-lines, but there's no bad teams with really great offensive lines. And I think that that's what Joe Douglas's mission statement is. And I agree with you with what you're saying. I think that you don't want to make the same mistake that Mike McCagnon made, which is he got Sam Darnold. He didn't have any second round picks. That's how he got Sam Darnold in the first place. So you can't criticize him there. But then he followed up with taking Nathan Shepard, an interior defensive lineman who, by the way, hasn't been that great. I mean, I think he's been a bit of a disappointment after how he played last year. And I'm kind of torn because if they get to that Seahawks pick, and I don't want to guess on who the top names will be at this point because the draft is just so fluid until about March. And a top edge rusher has fallen, let's say, a top edge rusher has fallen 5 or 10 picks past where he should have gone, and he's sitting there, I might take the edge rusher. And then if you're sitting in that first pick of the second round and there's a top corner there, how do you not take the core? I mean, you don't want to prioritize need over best player available, especially if they're all, positions of need, which the Jets for the most part will all have positions of need. There is a scenario where Joe Douglas takes Trevor, takes an edge rusher, takes a corner, and then he goes and attacks the offense. And I can see that some would criticize it, but if you nail those picks, nobody's going to be criticizing it. But I agree with you.
Free agency will dictate that a lot. Depends on what. If you can get Thuney, then the need definitely goes down with one of those high picks.
Yeah, for sure. I think you have to bring in one of those guards. I think you probably spend a receiver as well. I think obviously you can draft a receiver as well, but I don't think you want to chance it, especially with wide receiver depth. I think you should try to target a guy like Corey Davis or Allen Robinson. think you bring in a veteran running back. I mean, we've done this exercise so many times throughout the season, and we'll continue to do it for the next few months. But there's a lot of work to be done. I would say that edge rusher, as far as a positional need, that if you're asking for the greater good, what is the number 2 next need for the Jets? It's that edge rusher position, because the most important positions in football are corner, corner, left tackle, edge, and quarterback. I messed that order up, but those are the 4 positions regardless. I feel like the Jets have their quarterback if they get Trevor Lawrence. I think they have their left tackle and Becton. They don't have their edge rusher, and they don't have their corner. So I wouldn't be against adding those 2 guys, but I like your strategy of taking into your offensive lineman with that Seahawks pick. I know we said rapid fire, and we say this every single time, but I think we just spent like 7 minutes on that question. So let's keep it moving. From at McAnally John, I think I mispronounced that, but whatever. How long does the return from a Sam Darnold trade? How low does the return from a Sam Darnold trade have to get before you just keep him as a backup? Is that even possible, Michael, or do you think that regardless, Sam Darnold's going to be out of here? There's no chance that they would just keep him to be Trevor Lawrence's backup, right?
Yeah, I think it is an interesting question, because just hypothetically, not that it would get this low, but say his value dipped to, again, not saying it would get this low, but say he dipped to a 6th round pick value, then that would be interesting, because you keep him, maybe he has a good preseason, maybe your starter gets hurt, he gets a couple games to showcase, you trade him at the deadline for more. Obviously, you'd be declining his 5th-year option anyway. So then maybe at that point, you stick around with him. Maybe, but I like I said before about the floor of his trade value, I think it's probably not going to go lower than a 4th at worst. I still think it's a 3rd right now, and that I'm definitely taking that. So, but if it does go really low, and again, I don't think it will, then maybe there's an argument for it. But at the same time, you do just want to kind of move your franchise forward, make it clear who your quarterback is. So I think it's very unlikely they would keep him.
And I don't think you want Trevor Lawrence walking into that situation where Sam, the wounded soldier is already like.
And we talk about culture, Joe Douglas being a culture guy. This is an important culture move, I think. Not that Darnold's a bad guy, but not that he is even remotely. But it's just the controversy that would come with it. The presence of him being there. You just want to make it clear you're moving on.
In the hypothetical that his value fell to a 6, I from purely analytical perspective, I can see the thought process and like, well, let's just play him in some preseason games. Let's see if he plays better in a new offense. And then if somebody's starter goes down.
Teddy Bridgewater played himself into a 3rd round.
Exactly. You could probably work that value back up. But when you think of Trevor Lawrence is more important than Sam Darnold's trade value. And I think it would hurt him to be there. And I think you're right. You just want to move the franchise forward. Next question from at New York Jungle Sports. Obviously, Gase is gone, but with Woody seemingly coming back into the fold, any chance he wants to clean house completely and fire Douglas too? Definitely don't want that to happen, but slightly concerned he wants to start from scratch. I don't think there's any chance. First of all, I don't think the Johnsons can afford that. They gave Douglas like a 6-year contract, and we know that the Johnsons value money above all else. So I think there's 0 chance that happens. I also think that Christopher Johnson fully believes in Joe Douglas from all reports that you can read. And Woody Johnson's not completely removed from the team over the last 4 years. He presumably talks to his brother every week. I would imagine that Woody's talked to Joe Douglas a few times. I think Woody probably believes in Joe Douglas as well. So I don't see any chance of him coming back and firing Joe Douglas, but I could see him coming back and maybe making some changes in how the management to coach is structured. There's been some criticisms of the power structure. I don't really put much stock into this, the fact that the GM should be above the head coach. I think you can win with the GM and head coach being equal as long as they're partners and they work together. But I could see Woody coming in and making some changes in the broader Jets organization. I don't think he's going to touch Douglas and his staff, but he's going to make some changes. And the coaching staff is all going to be fired. I don't think there's a single coach that carries over. Maybe like a Sean Jefferson or a random positional coach, but even that I'd be fairly surprised. I think they're going to want to remove themselves from this 0-16 season as much as possible. And hell, if they don't win in the next few years, I think they're going to change the unis again as well. I think Woody's going to come back and really try to change things. But I think Douglas safe. What about you, Michael?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's almost impossible. I think mostly because of what you said. Contract obviously is the most important thing, but I think he's well regarded around the league. And despite the results, I think, like you said, Chris Johnson seems to like him. It's part of bringing him in anyway. I definitely think it's extremely unlikely that Douglas would not be retained.
From at Ben Thornhill 199, what's been your least enjoyable loss of the season? Mine was the shutout against Miami. I'll add a little bit. Least favorite and most enjoyable loss of this treacherous season, Michael.
So least favorite, I mean, this one's definitely in there from the perspective that there was pretty much nothing to cheer for at all, because you like losses from a tank perspective when there are still plays where you can get up and cheer for a key young player on the team. And we've had a few of those recently. So in terms of my favorite loss, the Chargers one is probably a good one because they didn't really kind of flirt with winning that game at all. But they were competitive. Quentin Williams was really good. Mims had some flashes. Hall had some flashes. There was a lot of good stuff in that game. So Chargers kind of comes to mind for me first. Obviously, the ending of the Raiders game was extremely entertaining. I think anyone who listens to this podcast, or at least the last episode, kind of knows how I reacted to that ending. But the majority of that game was not very entertaining. It was pretty stressful. So even though the ending was fun, the game leading up to it was definitely not. So I think the Chargers game is probably my favorite. Least favorite is this one's right up there. The Cardinals game, kind of, there wasn't really anything in that one. But I mean, I guess if we're talking about the whole season, it's probably the season opener because that's when, we were actually hoping to see them be successful. That was a complete blowout from from the holding penalty on the opening kickoff in that Bills game. That set the tone.
Forgot about that.
Entire season, just from there. I think I said something like that. I think I said like season's over right on that penalty. Joking,
we're wrong,
but turned out I was right. And I think the first pass was like a wide miss from Darnold to Herndon or something. So right from there, you could kind of tell how the season was going to go.
Yeah,
but,
I was going to.
But in terms of tank losses, least favorite, I'd go with the Seahawks one or the Cardinals, and favorite probably Chargers.
Yeah, I was going to say that as well. It's probably my least favorite would be week one, just because there was the early fumble at the beginning of the game. And even though Allen had driven all the way down the field, it was like, all right, here we go. And it was just 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out. And it was just a slow, I think they got down 21-0 by the end of the first quarter. And it was just like, oh boy, this is going to be a long game. And it was just a depressing game. But if I had to pick something more in the tank, I would say the Raiders game, honestly. That was stressful as hell. I don't think I couldn't take that. I mean, I literally switched the game. You could make the argument that the New England game was more stressful, but I think the Raiders, we had figured, was pretty safe game that the Raiders were going to come in and win. I think we teased a little bit that it was a bit of a trap game, but I wasn't expecting the Jets to win that. And then there was at least 2 minutes where I thought the Jets had won that game and in many ways lost that game. So I would say that was my least favorite. Just the way it ended was amazing, but that was just not great for my health. I guess I would say my favorite might have been Denver. I had fun watching that Denver game because it was still kind of at the point where I was kind of cheering for a win, but also cheering for Gase to get fired. And I thought Darnold had a sick run to open up the game. The defense had some cool plays, and I'd probably say Denver. There were some negatives in that game. Darnold getting hurt, Becton getting hurt, Mims not playing.
Colts was pretty bad too.
Colts was pretty brutal, I guess. Oh, geez, yeah, there's a lot of bad ones. It's been a dreadful season. Let's just put it that way. There's no great enjoyable games, but I will say, when the Jets finally do get their win next year, it's going to be all that much better. Especially
we should put it that none of these are truly enjoyable. It's not like I am. I mean, I'm not the person who should be saying this with the intro, with my reaction to the Ruggs play, but it's not like any of these are like truly thrilling and enjoyable to watch them lose. It's just understanding what's important for the future.
Do I need to play that reaction again? You're saying none of those were truly enjoyable. But I think that reaction, that reaction was more severe. That reaction was more so. We have the recording of you cheering when Darnold hit Robbie for the 92-yard touchdown against Dallas last year. And I think your reaction to the Ruggs play was more drastic and more dramatic than that play. So I don't know if you want to say that none of them have been great. I think that Raiders moment was pretty great for you. I just think the rest of the game was just so stressful, and there's no positive, I guess, outside of the last play, in the sense that in my eyes, it was like, well, if they win, they're only 1-11 or whatever. And if they lose and if they win, they're missing out on Trevor Lawrence. There was just no positives to winning that game. But I don't know. There's a lot of brutal games in the schedule, and there's 3 more to go. I think that Seahawks will probably be the worst loss of the season, but I hope it's week 17 against the Patriots. I'd love to just get stomped out from the first quarter so we can just all relax and talk about Trevor Lawrence the entire game. From at AK whatever one, who do we fuck up? Oh, Jesus. How do we fuck up getting the first pick? Michael, in the most Jets way possible, can you describe how you think the Jets will mess up getting Trevor Lawrence?
I actually kind of laid out a scenario in a tweet a couple days ago where, like, say you go into week 17 and Jaguars still haven't won. They're 1-14. Jets are 0-15. And you come down to the last, say there's 2 seconds left simultaneously. The Jets and Jaguars both down by 2 points. And they're both attempting a field goal to take the lead and win the game. The Jaguars go first. They miss the kick. They're 1-15. Then Sergio Castillo comes up. Jets are kicking with Trevor Lawrence on the line, and Castillo nails it. That's kind of like the nightmare scenario. I think I'd probably pass out if that happened.
All right, last 2 questions are about the head coaching candidate. So buckle in. This isn't really a question. At Mikey Troy, 65, not really a question, just a reminder. Prepare your mind, body, and soul for Wink Martindale, who is the Baltimore Ravens defensive coordinator. It's happening. Been seeing people talk about how he has a clear plan as a head coach, should be involved in all 3 phases, etc. Honestly, I'm warming up to it. The next question, we'll kind of talk about this, but is when it comes to Wink Martindale, I think he's probably referring to Michael Lombardi, who was talking about how teams make the mistake because they hire scheme over philosophy. They try to hire Seattle's defense when the Falcons hired Dan Quinn. They try to hire this person's offense and try to implement it as their head coach. But when being a head coach, it's just so much more than being an offensive coordinator and implementing it to a new team. You have to have a philosophy. You have to build your staff. You have to have players buy into you. You have to be able to teach. You have to be able to – there's a lot of different things that factor into being a head coach. And that's what people talk about, the CEO type of head coaching candidate, which is what will be asked next. And who can lead the organization? You look at what Brian Flores has done for Miami, Sean McDermott has done for Buffalo, Ron Rivera, what he's doing for Washington this year, that type of head coach. And there's plenty of them in the NFL, but not enough. Too many teams are making that mistake. And I think the Jets made the same mistake with Adam Gase. I don't know. They weren't necessarily hiring a top offense. I guess they just bought into the Adam Gase could do his offense in New York, but they clearly didn't do enough research in the fact that Adam Gase, the CEO, Adam Gase, the leader, Adam Gase's staff, those are where he's really going to fall. I'm sure if Adam Gase was offensive coordinator, I don't think he'd be good, but I think his offense would probably be fine. It would probably be around 20 in my mind, based off this year, maybe lower, but it's really Adam Gase, the CEO, where he turns into a terrible head coach. But Wink Martindale checks a lot of those boxes, has a connection with Joe Douglas. Michael, how would you feel about Wink Martindale being named the Jets head coach? I think I've warmed up a little bit on defensive guys being the head coach as opposed to the beginning of the season. But what are your thoughts on Don Martindale?
Well, yeah, I think like you said, the defensive coach idea needs to be accepted more. And I think, like you, I also have kind of warmed up to it more. I think we are all sort of in the beginning of the season, sort of like get offense, you got to develop your quarterback. And this is an offensive league. Teams are scoring more points. You got to get offense. But now I think we're all starting to realize that culture and just building a program, getting guys to buy in, being able to relate with players, teach players, and just have an overall philosophy, a vision for the team is really what is most important, in addition to everything in terms of scheme, play calling, things like that. And whether that guy is an offensive coach, a defensive-minded coach, or even a special teams coach like Joe Judge with the Giants, and not that the Giants have been amazing this year, but still he, got that job and is doing some nice things. But no matter what their background is, it's most important to have all of those head coach traits. And that's kind of the biggest takeaway with the failure of Adam Gase's tenure. I mean, the offensive results speak for themselves, so it's not like he even has that going for him. But the biggest weakness is that even if he did sort of have that going for him, the Jets could not win with him as a head coach because there's just not that, stability in place. There's not that vision. There's no philosophy. Players aren't necessarily playing for him. He doesn't even coach. He doesn't even interact with the defensive side of the ball at all. On the Ruggs play, he wasn't even looking at the field. And that's just one example of many. At practice, he doesn't even do anything.
Didn't Jamal Adams say that he turns his back on to the defense on practice, or was that
exactly? Yeah,
he literally turned his back on the defense in the game.
Not a head coach at all. You need your head coach to really be able to run the program. So regardless of what side of the ball they're on, if their defense then you got to get that guy like Brian Flores in Miami. There are just so many examples, but it doesn't matter what side of the ball they're on. The Jets, especially as a team who are 0-16, are going to have a really bad look publicly. You need a guy to turn that around. So if Martindale's that guy, if it's another defensive coach, whether it's Robert Saleh, whoever it is, then it definitely makes sense to get that guy. I lean towards offense because of the direction that the NFL is going, because you want your coach because your coordinators get poached easily, especially if they're offensive. So to have your head coach be the guy who's running your offense helps, so you don't have to lose him. So I do lean towards offense mainly for that reason, to keep him safe, keep the guy who's leading your young quarterback's offense safe from other teams, mainly for that reason. But
yeah, I mean, look at Tennessee.
Defensive coach, then it definitely makes sense.
I mean, look at Tennessee. We've talked a lot about Arthur Smith and how much we love him, and Mike Vrabel gets a lot of praise for being this top young head coaching candidate, but his defense is terrible this year. The reason that they're going to make a playoff run this year is because of Arthur Smith's offense, and so I think that's where teams get into trouble hiring defensive guy. It happened to Atlanta. They went to the Super Bowl with Kyle Shanahan, and then he leaves and the whole team falls apart. It's happened with Philadelphia with Doug Peterson. He was an offensive guy, but they had Frank Reich was the genius, and he leaves and they all fall apart. So I think we've seen some of these examples, and we just want to hire that guy. If you can land that Frank Reich, or if you can land that Kyle Shanahan or that Arthur Smith, and he's your head coach, you're not going to lose him. You're not going to risk having the rug pulled out from underneath you. You already have your Sean Payton. Your offense is already going to be up there. But it can't be the number one thing. You can't just go and hire that scheme because it doesn't really work. And we'll just bleed into our final question from @afanstake_MYJ. What realistic CEO type of coaching candidates are we looking at? And you mentioned Robert Saleh. He's a guy that's really shot up my boards. I know he was interviewed last year and has been kind of a top candidate throughout the season, but I have warmed up to hiring a defensive guy. And I think when you look at what he's going to bring in, first of all, you look at San Francisco was a terrible defense before he gets there. Obviously they had some help in the draft. They drafted some stud defensive linemen, but even with all the injuries, they've still performed. They were the best defense of the league last year. He's emotional. He's energetic. His players love him. His players, if you read articles about the way Richard Sherman feels about him, about the way Fred Wagner feels about him, when you have defensive leaders that are publicly campaigning for your defensive coordinator to get a head coaching shot, you listen to the way Kyle Shanahan talks about him. I think that Robert Saleh is going to come in, and whether it's people are linking him to Detroit because he's from Michigan, whether it's Detroit or whether it's New York or Atlanta or wherever he ends up going, I do have a good feeling that he's going to instill a Robert Saleh culture. He has a philosophy. He has the idea of what he wants his team to be. And the other thing about him is he's going to bring in a Shanahan disciple to run that offense, to be that offensive coordinator, whether it's Mike McDaniels. There's plenty of top assistants on that staff that could run your offense. So I believe in his ability to build a staff as well. I think that's the type of guy that I'd be very excited about. King Arthur's number one because I do believe that he is kind of what we were saying earlier. He is that Kyle Shanahan type of head coach. He can be kind of what the Jets were trying to do with Adam Gase. I think Arthur Smith is legit that type of coach. And what we laid out in our article, or the article that I wrote earlier this season, is I do think he has a lot of CEO qualities. I mean, you listen to a former player talking about how he was emotional. He became emotional talking about Arthur Smith and how much he means to him and things like that. I mean, Arthur Smith clearly is a leader. I do believe in him being a CEO type. And I think it is, if you can have the offensive guy, that's in some ways more valuable, but you look at all the top culture CEO guys, they've all been defensive guys, from Belichick to Carroll to Tomlin. Harbaugh was a special teams guy. To all the young guys we've just mentioned between Flores and McDermott and whatnot. You can't just pick a side and decide that's the offense that we're going to try to run. You have to go with schemes. So as far as best CEO types, Michael, who are some of the candidates? Now, this is not a distant conversation. This is 3 weeks away. The Jets are going to start interviewing people. Who are some of the best CEO types? And by the way, this is the type of hire that Joe Douglas is going to make. First day he talked about culture, he's not going to make that mistake of just hiring an offensive coordinator. He's going to hire the guy he wants to be paired with and the guy he thinks can be that CEO of his team. So, Michael, who are some candidates that come to mind?
Well, I think this is where you start to look towards the guys with head coaching experience and specifically the college ranks. So I think this is where you have your Matt Campbells, Pat Fitzgerald, Todd Monken, guys like that who have been head coaches, turned around programs and teams. Those are the type of guys who I think are really the best fits. And that's what made Matt Rule so interesting, why he was my favorite candidate for the Jets in 2019, because he just really exuded that sort of vibe of a guy who changes a program, because he did it in two different places with Temple, with Baylor. And now it looks like he's on the way. Not that the Panthers have had an amazing season this year, but they've definitely exceeded expectations. And it looks like he's on the way to doing that in Carolina. So guys like that definitely stand out to me. And I think that is where the college appeal sort of comes from. When you can find these guys who have succeeded as head coaches, proven they can turn organizations around, is really appealing for teams that like in the Jets position, similar positions, where they just need a guy to just turn it around and establish a new sort of identity with the team. So I think guys like that stand out. And to talk about Arthur Smith, I think he does have he's not necessarily that rah-rah sort of coach like a Rex Ryan or Jim Harbaugh, not that sort of leader. But I think when you read up on him, and you brought up a lot of great quotes and points in your article on him, is that it's just player to coach relations that I think it seems that he really specializes in. There are a lot of great quotes and players that have talked about him. There are tons of pictures and videos of him working with players, very, just, coach to player one-on-one, coaching them up. And I think that's really important. Can you, teach players? Can you teach technique? Can you be a guy who they are okay talking with, being open with, giving suggestions? Learning from you. Can they be open and accepting of what you teach to them? Because is Adam Gase that sort of guy who players sort of listen to, want to take advice from? I don't think he is. So I think that's the type of leader Arthur Smith can be. And a good point you made when we were talking before this is I think Arthur Smith can be the type of guy who, if you get him in a room with Joe Douglas, they can really hit it off and see things similarly. Both of them are former college offensive linemen. Arthur Smith has built that Titans team through the offensive line, through the run game, through the play action, all sort of things that Joe Douglas believes in. So I do think that those two guys could really sort of have a connection if the Jets bring Smith in for an interview, and that can make him an outlier as a guy who isn't necessarily a head coach, isn't seen as a CEO sort of type, is an offensive coordinator, but does have enough of those head coach qualities and just, CEO type leadership qualities in addition to the scheme stuff that can make him really enticing.
And you made a really good point that I forgot to mention, because in addition to all that CEO type, in addition to all the CEO qualities, arguably the number one most important quality is the philosophy has to match the GMs. They have to be in lockstep between the GM and the head coach. And you saw that with Bowles and McCagnon, that it was the complete opposite. And firing Bowles was not a mistake on the Jets' part. I don't think Todd Bowles was a good head coach in his first, try as the Jets head coach, but I think he'll get another opportunity this offseason. And I think he might be good. I mean, I think there is a chance that Todd Bowles goes to the right situation and succeeds. And the reason is when you look at the type of team that Todd Bowles wanted to build, and you could just see it in the way that he coached and the coordinators that he hired, he wanted to build a defensive first, run first team that had a game manager basically the blueprint that the Jets had in 2009, 2010 with Rex Ryan. Defense and smash mouth football. And Mike McCagnon, on the other hand, didn't really have a full plan. I think that was a thing that really plagued McCagnon, is he just kind of looked like he was doing it as he was going. He didn't really have a vision for the team, but he didn't draft a single offensive lineman for Todd Bowles. He wasn't nailing the picks that he was making regardless. So Todd Bowles was just put in an impossible situation where he has a terrible roster. Exactly. A terrible roster and a roster that wasn't built to his strengths. And I still think outside of 2016, Todd Bowles did get the most out of his team every single year. And you look, I'm not saying that he's a good head coach. I think he was far too conservative. Again, that kind of lines up with his philosophy as a defensive run first team. He wasn't very aggressive on fourth down. He did play the field position battle and whatnot, but that's just a good example of a head coach and a GM not matching up. Obviously the GM's bad. The head coach it was also bad, but if Todd was with a GM that matched up with him better, who knows? Who knows if he would still be a head coach today? And so that's very important with who they hire. As far as CEO guys, Campbell from Iowa State, Monken. If they want to keep looking at the college ranks, I think Dan Mullen from Florida, maybe. I don't think Harbaugh, I don't really buy into him as a CEO type of guy. I mean, as far as CEO type guys, Saleh is the most intriguing to me. I think Bill Cowher obviously fits the bill. I don't know. I don't know if he will. If he was interested in it, I would be very interested in Bill Cowher. I know he's an old dinosaur, but when you look at the success that he's had in this league, I saw some crazy stat that I think his teams only lost one game when they got up by 11 points at any point in the game. I think it was something crazy like 116-1, or that wasn't exactly right, but he'd only lost one game when his team at any point got up by 11. He's won a Super Bowl. He transformed the culture in Pittsburgh, and the Jets need a Parcells-like guy who came in after Kotite and transformed the culture and set the Jets up on the best 12-year run of their franchise. And I think they need that. So if that's just Bill Cowher for 5 to 10 years, I'm all for that. But I don't know if he's fully interested. I think Saleh is very interesting to me. Arthur Smith, he's maybe not a CEO type of guy, but Martindale as well. I mean, was just mentioned in the previous question. He probably fits the bill there. He has the connections to Joe Douglas. But as far as CEO guys, even though he's never been a head coach, I think Saleh can be that type of guy. I think he will be that CEO type of guy and not just focus on the defense. I think he'll focus on his philosophy and not his scheme. Michael, anything else you want to cover before we get out of here? I think that's going to do it for the mailbag questions. The Jets do have 3 more games left. They got LA next week. I don't think there's any chance they win that, as we've talked about. But it's certainly nerve-wracking as we're getting towards the finish here. I don't think there's any chance that Gase is gone or Darnold gets benched. I think they're going to ride with this unit for the next 3 games, and let's hope it's just been as bad as it was on Sunday. Michael, any final thoughts?
Yeah, it will be interesting to see if the biggest thing in addition to the tanking is obviously the young players. And this is going to be a really tough challenge. This Rams team is number 1 and the fewest points allowed per drive. So they've been fantastic defensively this season. It's going to be tough if Mims does come back. Barrios had a few plays in this game. Maybe he'll get a chance to do some more. And Becton as well is going to be able to go up against Aaron Donald. That should be fun to watch. I think that's the biggest thing, these young players. And this Seahawks game, they did what they needed to do in terms of tanking, but you also didn't really get to see anything that made you excited for the future. Bryce Hall got toasted in this game after looking pretty solid in his first few games, I thought, but he definitely had a bad one in this game against the Seahawks. So biggest thing is the young players, and the Rams do give you quite a few challenges. Hall's going to have another tough matchup against their wide receivers with Woods and Kupp. And then again, Becton against Aaron Donald, you can't ask for better competition than that. Quinnen Williams goes up against a really solid Rams offensive line that is much improved off of last season. So the Rams do provide a lot of good challenges for the young talent on the roster. So I'm always looking forward to that. I always love watching the film after the game and looking at the numbers, see how all those key young players did. And they're getting quite a few good challenges here at the end of the season. So I think the young players in the roster are getting really beneficial experience. And that's been the whole season. The schedule that the Jets have had is pretty ridiculous when you look at it. They have the hardest strength of schedule in the league. So these young players have gotten the chance to go up against some elite talent this season. And I think it's really going to serve them well going forward.
Well, I think we've said it all, Michael. I mean, 2 more weeks of relatively the same podcast. I mean, things will change. It's that one post-game reaction to Week 17 will either be ecstatic or depressed. I can already feel it.
I mean, it could be 16 if Gardner Minshew comes through.
That's true. Yeah, you're right. If Gardner Minshew can come through, he looked good today. This thing could be wrapped up before that Week 17 game, which would be amazing for my health. If the Jags end up finishing 1-15 and the Jets still win, I mean, I'll just think about all the close games that the Jags were in this year that they just couldn't finish. Obviously, last week in overtime against Minnesota, against Cleveland the week before. They've had so many close games where they couldn't close the deal. And I mean, obviously, Jags fans probably look at the Jets last week as missing the easiest win ever and calling a cover 0 and a Hail Mary. But regardless, you can follow us at CYJ Pod on Twitter. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. Jets X Factor, best place to go for Jets content. We're there. A lot of cool stuff coming at Jets X Factor as we head into the offseason. We'll keep that under wraps for now. We are sponsored by Manscaped. You can use the code CoolYourJets. I think that is all, as we've said. I mean, it's just a few more podcasts, and then we can finally set Trevor Lawrence or Justin Fields, I guess, name in stone as the future of the New York Jets. I think there is a chance, though, if they do pick number 2, that maybe they go with Zach Wilson, or maybe I don't think they stick with Darnold, but if they could just make it easy and just get Trevor Lawrence and we could just get out of here, that would be great.
Yeah, that would be nice. I would appreciate that.
Yeah, I would really appreciate if the Jets can just do what they do the best and just suck and lose, and then we can work on fixing this thing. Let's just tear it all out, get that number 1 pick, and then we can finally start to rebuild this culture. Follow Michael at Michael_Nandia, myself at Ben W. Blessington. That's going to do it for us, guys. Stay tuned, and don't let the Jets ruin your life.
Has to work quickly. Down to 6 seconds. Carr going down again. And it's Quentin Williams this time for the Jets.
Over the middle, in the air, picked off. Brian Poole to the end zone, touchdown. Hunter to beat, and the punter brings him down. Braden Mann saved a touchdown, most likely.
Looks right, fires a bomb down the right sideline again for Mims. What a catch by Denzel Mims.